Moving on to Chapter 2 lecture. Chapter 2 talks about drug names and references. How do drugs get named and why they get named the way they do, and what kind of references are out there. I'm not going to go into this too deeply. When you get into your job, you're going to find a reference that suits you best. For example, none of the references that I named today are ones I actually use. And none of the ones that are listed in the book are ones I actually use. I use something called Lexicomp. It's a huge database with any drug known to man in it, and it's got all of the important information I need. It's online, and my company pays for it. So sometimes I'll use Hippocrates. I have that on my phone. It's similar. It's just not as in-depth as Lexicomp. Or I'll use Johns Hopkins antibiotics or Sanford's antibiotic guides. I deal a lot with infectious disease therapy. So find a reference that works for you. Your company will probably pay for one and have it available for you at work. And if it's not working for you, talk to them about changing it, or find one on your phone as an app that you can use that can give you enough information that you need to do your job. The ones I mentioned today are very formal. They're more, it's just a lot of information, or maybe it's more about what's in the drug itself. We'll get to that though. So while they are references and while they are there, they're not very commonly used in practice all the time. So Chapter 2 starts with the definition of pharmacology, which is the study of drugs and their origin, the nature of the drug, properties, and their effects on living organisms. So basically, what does that mean? Everything about the drug, what it's indicated for, how it acts, what its mechanism of action is, what its side effects are, what its metabolism properties are like. That is the study of pharmacology or pharmacotherapy as well. Where the drug came from, and generally just everything that you need to know about a drug and how it acts when it's in the human body. Classifying drugs. Drugs are classified basically on their therapeutic use. For example, a class of diuretics is a class of drugs that gets rid of excess fluid in the body. There's several drugs that fall within this class and several different subclasses based on mechanism of action. But drugs are almost always classified based on their use, or their proper term for that is their indication. So drug classes have characteristics, as I was just saying, their therapeutic use, common side effects, precautions, contraindications, and interactions. So therapeutic use is easy. What's it used for in therapy? Common side effects, the ones that are seen more often, aren't necessarily enough to stop someone from taking the drug and aren't very harmful. So for example, nausea, stomach upset, headache. Precautions are something that might stop a patient from using a drug. For example, if the patient has a history of heart disease, maybe they shouldn't use a certain drug. Contraindications are absolute reasons why a patient would not want to take a drug. One of the most common contraindications is a hypersensitivity to a medication, anaphylactic reaction, hives, rash, etc. So interactions are between drugs and food, drugs and liquid, drugs and other drugs. Usually when we are concerned about interactions, we're most concerned with drugs and other drugs. And we'll get into that when we actually start talking about specific classes of medications. A prototype is a model example, and it typifies the characteristics of that class. So it's a model example drug for that class. What I can think of, they mentioned propranolol for beta blockers. I don't know if I disagree or agree on that. It's pretty standard, but most of the drugs within a class will exemplify the characteristics for that class. The prototype was usually the one that's most commonly used or was there first. Naming drugs. You'll see a couple different names for drugs. If it's capitalized, it's a brand name. That was the name developed by the company itself. For example, let me see if I can think of a common one. Lasix is the brand name. The generic name of the drug is furosemide. The generic name is assigned by the USAN. It's very commonly used, especially once the drug is off patent, and it's usually lowercase, whereas the brand name, which came from the drug company, is uppercase and has a registered or trademark sign at the end. One more name that you might see is the chemical name. Hopefully you won't see it too often. Usually it's very, very long and hard to pronounce, and that is the exact molecular formula of the drug. The official name is usually the same as the generic name, and the name of the drug as it appears in references. So how does a drug end up getting called by one or the other? When Lasix first came out, it was patent protected. I think it was a long time ago. So for a certain number of years, the drug manufacturer who came out with that drug has exclusive rights to that drug. Only they can manufacture it. Only they can sell it. So once that drug is off patent, then other companies, which are called generic companies, are able to come in and produce that medication for a lower price and market it under the generic name. The generic name of Lasix is furosemide, which most people are more familiar with now because Lasix has been a generic for a very long time. Let's see. So substitution of generics. When a drug develops a generic eventually after it's off patent, that generic company has to prove that their generic is equivalent in strength, purity, and quality to the original brand drug. It can have different fillers, it can be a different color, shape, or size. However, it must be equivalent in the way it's going to act once it's in the body. You are allowed to substitute generics for brands if there is one available, unless the doctor writes DAW, which means dispense as written. We already discussed scheduled drugs. Some legal terms. OTC is over the counter. Legend means it's prescription only, and that includes controlled substances, but if it's scheduled, that means it is a controlled substance. So those terms are kind of used interchangeably. You'll hear them pretty often. Over the counter means that it can be purchased without a prescription, though. Terms indicating drug actions, we've already discussed most of those, so I don't think I'm going to go over them again. Just become familiar with those terms. That's the way you're going to see drugs discussed in your nursing drug reference, indication, side effect, etc. So you want to become familiar with what each of them means. They're also on your project, so when you turn in your project, you'll be filling out columns based on that information about the drug. Drug references. Again, I'm going to have you review that on your own. The ones that are listed in here, not as commonly used in practice, which isn't a bad thing. They're just big, heavy books that aren't as convenient as what's available today. Let's talk about the internet, though. The internet can be a great resource for information. Some of these references are online, and some of them are reliably placed online. The information can't be tampered with. So if you can find a reference online, that's great. Use it. You can kind of glean your information from it. However, there are unreliable websites out there as well. Google will turn up a number of things. Stay away from Wikipedia, and stay away from anything that involves testimonials, forums, or something that hasn't been updated in a very long time. Drug information is frequently changing, so somebody who's doing their work with a reference should really keep it updated. Discussion boards, also unreliable. So keep in mind that when you're using the internet, it can either help or it can really hold you back. A lot of times if I don't know something, I'll Google search it immediately, but I stick to websites that I know can be trusted, such as ISMP, which is a safety website, or maybe the website for the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, or a well-known research website that posts journal articles. So if it's from a journal, it's most likely reliable. If it's from Wikipedia or some discussion board or, you know, miracle life-saving medication, it's probably not reliable. Okay, that covers Chapter 2. We'll move on to Chapter 3 in the next lecture.